Good afternoon, everyone. I call the meeting to order. Welcome to the 56th meeting of the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We acknowledge that we meet on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Notre réunion aujourd'hui se déroule sous forme hybride.
Our meeting today will be a hybrid form according to the standing order adopted in June 2022. Deliberations will be broadcast on the website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entire committee.
I would like to outline a few rules to follow. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting in French, English, and Inuktitut. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, Inuktitut, English, or French. Please select your language now. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming our proceedings. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verifications Officer. S'il vous plaît, adressez vos interventions au président.
Please address the chair when speaking.
And clearly, when you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on November 21st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of improving graduation rates of Indigenous students. And today, our first panel, we welcome Giwatanook Internet High School, Nikki Osborne, teacher and graduation coach. Nunavut Arctic College, Rebecca Mearns, president. Yukon University, Shayla Rolls, provost and vice president academic by video conference. And please correct me if I've said any of your names improperly. We are first going to begin with President Mearns, and you'll start us off with 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Madame la Présidente.
Oh, Madam Chair, I'm sorry, I had raised my hand. Thank you. I was not able to do this last time, but congratulations on your new function, and I'm sure everything will go swimmingly, and I'm very pleased that you're new chair of the committee, even though I preceded Mr. Garneau. Madam Chair, I would have liked to talk about the motion that I had tabled about a week ago. I don't know if it's possible to discuss my motion at this point.
Et tandis qu'on attend, j'entends.
While we're waiting, perhaps there's some microphones that are not on mute. I can hear people speaking. Mrs. Ginn. Could you ask this during the question period? Yes.
Inviting me here today to speak with you. My name is Rebecca Mearns. I'm the president of Nunavut Arctic College, and I work out of Iqaluit. So just a little background, the Nunavut Arctic College is both a post-secondary institute and a public agency of the government of Nunavut. It was created through the Nunavut Arctic College Act on January 1st of 1995. And the college is situated within Inuit Nunangat and serves the largest post-secondary population, or largest post-secondary region in Canada, I should say. It's represented by a network of sites, supports, and people across the territory, providing a diverse range of programs, including adult education, certificate, diploma, and degree programs, as well as cultural programming and certified trades. Nunavut Arctic College's facilities include 25 community learning centers, 3 regional campuses, 1 cultural school, and 1 trade school. Some of our longest running programs include the Nunavut Teacher Education Program, which provides graduates with a Bachelor of Education, and the Environmental Technology Diploma Program. Each of these programs have been running for over 35 years. So during my time with the college, I've seen the opportunities and the challenges that come with delivering post-secondary education in Nunavut. Today, I'll share an example of a program that's received significant investment for expansion of delivery, the Nunavut Teacher Education Program. The Nunavut Teacher Education Program, through a tripartite working group between the Government of Nunavut, the Government of Canada through Canadian Heritage, and Nunavut Tungavik Incorporated, received $34.7 million to fund a Pathfinder project. This project not only allowed the college to expand the delivery of the program, but it also included dedicated funds to revitalize the program. Through this funding, the college almost doubled the number of communities offering the Bachelor of Education program. This has been such an important investment in the college and for Nunavut, providing decentralized training for Inuit and other Nunavummiut, and providing the necessary credentials for those individuals to become teachers within our elementary schools. The program now embeds Inuit language and culture courses into the first 2 years of this 5-year program. In doing this, students now have an exit option after 2 years, having earned an Inuktitut language and cultural diploma. Exit and entry points are an important feature for our adult learners, and the college is proud of the work it's done to create these laddering opportunities. The Pathfinder funding included academic and non-academic supports to encourage student success. Key supports identified by the college included academic tutors, Inuit cultural advisors and elders, and information technology. I can't overstate the magnitude of this investment. Over the past 2 years, the college has gone from delivering the Nunavut Teacher Education Program in 8 Nunavut communities with approximately 90 students, to our current delivery in 15 communities with over 170 students enrolled. For a small institution with just over 270 staff and faculty positions, this is an incredible increase. The rollout of this expansion has not been without its challenges, of course. One of our biggest challenges is space for the delivery of the program. The investment into the teacher education program has allowed the college to deliver the BEd, as I said, across 15 communities and community learning centers. Now, 11 of these community learning centers, 11 of the 25, are small 1 and 2 classroom buildings. 17 of the CLCs, or community learning centers, were built in the 1990s or earlier, with 1 being built in 1965 and 5 being built in the 1970s. By delivering the Nunavut Teacher Education Program, we're dedicating that classroom space for upwards of 5 years, which means that if that is the only classroom in that community learning center, we're not able to deliver other programming there until this program is complete. And of course, there's so many programs that are of interest to our community members. So as we see increasing success through the expansion of the Nunavut Teacher Education Program, it's evident that major infrastructure investments are needed before we can explore the expansion of any of our other existing or future programs. This also means that investments needed in the housing sector, and although Nunavut Arctic College does have the ability to offer some single and student family units, we're very limited, and often the requests highly outnumber the number of houses that we have available for our students.
So sorry, Ms. Mearns,
Yep.
if you could add the rest of your comments perhaps during the question and answer
Oh,
period.
yes,
Just your
absolutely.
time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Osborne for 5 minutes.
Buju, Anin Wache, Nikki Osborne Nidijnakas, she, her. Thunder Bay Donji. For the past 9 years, I've had the best job in the world, which is obviously being a teacher. I've had the honor to work exclusively with Indigenous students from Northern Ontario. The vast majority of my students come from small, fly-in communities. For the past 3 years, I've worked as the graduation coach at Kiiwetinook Internet High School. I could talk to you all day about student success and graduation rates. Let me know what you're doing later. But I'm no expert, but I have seen what moves the mark and what makes a difference. What it boils down to is holistic student support delivered by caring and dedicated people. I hope today that I can talk to you at length about our successful adult education program. This program is delivered by our co-op teacher, who is the same person that oversees our nutrition program. This allows students to access healthy and tasty foods at breakfast, at lunch, during evening study hall tutorials, and weekend catch-up sessions. All of these classroom hours are, of course, supervised by our amazing teachers, so please ask me about them later. Please ask me about our course specialist. She does really important things like make sure our lessons reflect pedagogy that would make any ministry inspector smile. But my favorite thing that she does is work online one-on-one with students. So even a learner that is going through yet another lockdown or is out of town receiving medically necessary treatment not available in their home community. And by the way, I'm not talking about complex care like seeing a specialist or anything like that. I'm talking about x-rays. Even a learner in that situation can access the support of a teacher. Please ask me about our 2 full-time wellness workers. They work day-to-day to support students with their mental health and well-being, but they're also there in a time of a crisis. They literally answer their phones 24/7, and I do not know how our school could function without their support. Please ask me about our student success team made up of our special education resource teacher, our student achievement officer, and our student success teacher. I hope today you have time to ask me about our amazing native language teacher. She offers 6 Indigenous language courses in 3 different dialects. She also helps teachers like me improve my pronunciation. She works very closely with our land-based teacher to provide culturally important learning opportunities on the land for our students. Ask me today about our guidance counselors, administrators, support staff, our classroom assistants that are hired from within our communities. All of the success that we have seen and continue to strive for at Kiiwetinoong Internet High School is 100% a team effort. And yeah, if you ask me, I'll tell you what a graduation coach does too. I can also tell you that as investors and stakeholders, we all know that early supports will always be more effective than any late interventions. I promise you that a speech and language pathologist seeing a kindergarten student that is nonverbal will always be more effective than any tutoring I can give in high school. I promise you that a designated early reading intervention teacher in grade 2 will be far more effective in improving graduation rates than any IEP that can be written in high school. We need to work with local education authorities to make sure that the desperately needed spec ed support is in place. I don't need to tell you the effect that COVID has had in the last few years. We also need to give my potential grads a reason to graduate. We need to work with local bands and industry to provide employment opportunities both on and off reserve. Graduating from high school is not easy, and it shouldn't be easy. I don't want it to be easy. No meaningful learning has ever come from easy. As I have told many of my frustrated students, if graduating from high school was easy, then everybody would have a diploma. But we need to take actionable steps to get rid of unnecessary barriers that my children and your children will never have to face. Let's work together to get rid of these inequalities so that students can roll up their sleeves and get on with the hard work, the meaningful and purposeful hard work of earning their diploma. Chinigwech.
Thank you very much, Ms. Osborne. And we'll now go to Ms. Rowles from Yukon University by video conference. Can you please turn your camera on? Ms. Rowles?
She's there. She's online. Perfect. And can you see me yet?
Can't see you yet.
Sorry.
There we go.
How's that?
Great.
Thanks. Okay, well, thank you to the Indigenous and Northern Affairs Committee for the opportunity to speak to you today on improving graduation rates and successful outcomes for Indigenous students. My name is Sheila Rolls, and I'm the Provost and Vice President Academic at Yukon University. I began working at the university in 1991 when it was Yukon College, spending my first 6 years in the flying community of Old Crow. Typically, I would be joining you from my office in Whitehorse, located in the traditional territories of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Tan-Kwachan Council. But today I'm joining you from Moab, Utah, on the traditional and ancestral lands of the bands of the Ute and the clans of the ancestral Pueblo people. And I'll start by telling you more about Yukon University. We're a progressive post-secondary institution, Canada's first and currently only university north of 60. Yukon U is early in our journey to becoming a university, but we've been providing post-secondary education in the North since 1963. Our 13 campuses are situated on the traditional territories of the 14 Yukon First Nations and 12 communities. And our vision is to become a thriving and learning and research community leading Canada's North. University's first strategic plan sets out our priorities for the next 5 years, taking our place in advancing reconciliation. And that means that we'll strengthen our collaboration with Yukon First Nations to meet their goals in education. Little Sam and Carmack's elder-in-chief, Roddy Blackjack, often spoke of the importance of keeping Indigenous and Western views side by side. Every graduate and employee of Yukon U must complete a Yukon First Nations competency to ensure understanding and appreciation for the unique context that we operate in throughout the Yukon. It's also important for me to mention to you that Yukon University operates in a territory like many other places in Canada that's been rocked by several concurrent crises. The pandemic, substance abuse, affordable housing, and cost of living, and all to say that the past few years have been incredibly difficult for our communities. Barriers to obtaining high school education and later to post-secondary studies have grown significantly. However, Yukon communities and Yukon U have adapted and we're resilient. I'd like to share with you several success stories from the past few years flowing from federal investment in key areas of housing and infrastructure, economic diversification, environmental protection and remediation. And you'll notice that there's a common theme in bringing education to people in their communities instead of insisting people travel hundreds of kilometers to access programming. And my first example is Yukon University's Housing Maintainer Program. The program has been impactful in Yukon communities. And during the past 2 years, the university has worked with 3 First Nation governments to deliver the program to 29 students. Students developed a knowledge in the skilled trades and acquired an understanding of modern building science. And they're able to use the course hours towards an apprenticeship if they decide to pursue those paths. Plus, they increased housing capacity in their home communities. The Yukon First Nations Arts Certificate Program provides an incredible opportunities for emerging entrepreneurs and craftspeople. It was delivered in 13 communities to 84 students between 2019 and 2022 in partnership with Yukon First Nation governments. It was funded through the Northern Adult Basic Education Initiative through CanOR. The classes were delivered on timelines suitable for each community and drew from the expertise of local artists. The program fostered the development of local businesses and was a platform for students to support each other during the trying days of the pandemic. Land use planning, environmental remediation, and environmental monitoring are key priorities stemming from the Yukon land claims and self-government agreements. 57 students have completed or are enrolled in the Environmental Monitoring Certificate Program, which runs in a compressed model offered several times per year for people employed as monitors in their community or training to become a monitor. All graduates are employed. While some of these numbers may seem small, providing the knowledge and skills for just one individual can make an incredible impact on a community of 300 or 400 people. It can mean that water quality is monitored and that the repairs to the community gathering space or housing can be done without waiting weeks for someone from afar to come. There's a tremendous opportunity for the federal government to have a greater and more meaningful impact on small northern communities in the areas we've outlined. What's required is stable, longer-term funding models that enable us to collaborate with Yukon First Nations to develop, build, and deliver and assess the programs we offer for the greatest success, and to scale up and expand when we achieve it. And I appreciate the opportunity and speak to you all today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rolls. We'll now proceed to our first round of questions, beginning with the Conservatives and Mr. Zimmer for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my questions will be to Rebecca Mearns. It was a pleasure to meet you at the Northern Lights Conference just a few months ago. And recently we were just up in Nunavut and Cambridge Bay and got to experience the college up there and just some of the facilities as well. But I'm looking at an interesting article. It says 10 things you might not know about NEC's president, Becky Mearns. And it's quite interesting. I challenge the committee members to check it out afterwards. But you were born in Iqaluit, so you're a local. And that's one of the reasons why I really thought you'd be valuable to be here to really hear your perspective, not just as an education professional, but somebody that is actually went through the system there, and to see what we could do to increase those graduation rates. Mm-hmm. But just for the sake of the committee, I think one more thing I'd like to add to your resume that's listed here is this summer she caught her first seal while out boating, amongst many other things that you have on your resume. But welcome today, Rebecca. Thank you. You know that the study is about the increasing grad rates. And again, I heard you speak specific at Northern Lights, talking about post-secondary, but I think they're related, because I think if I'm a former teacher myself, if a student doesn't have an opportunity post-graduation, they might not see graduation as that important. Mm-hmm. But maybe just speak to, again, as a person from the north, from Nunavut, what would you say is some of the key things that we need to do to increase those graduation rates amongst our northern communities?
I think there's some great connections between what we do at the college and our K-12 education system in Nunavut. As I spoke to the Nunavut Teacher Education Program, the entire goal of that is to get more Inuit and Nunavummiut into the classrooms in Nunavut. When I was going through high school and when I was going through the system in Nunavut, we'd often have teachers come from outside of the territory. Some would stay for a long time, some would stay for a year or two. And so that turnover really impacts how children are building relationships within their classrooms and those connections with their teachers. So our hope is that, one, we're encouraging Nunavummiut and Inuit to go into our classrooms, but we're also creating classrooms where Inuktitut language, culture, and access to the land is really key as well, and providing those supports within the classroom to hopefully support the success of our K-12 students.
And we see that's the key to success in often those remote communities, is really getting that connection to the community. What have you seen as what this is an effort to train teachers really from the community, so they'll stay in the community, really connect with the students, and for a longer period of time than just that kind of 2 years in and then you're out somewhere else. What have you seen as a success rate, or maybe some examples? Have you seen where that's been really taken up in the community, where kids really want to become teachers there? What have you seen?
Well, I can give an example of one of our cohorts that's just started this year. So as I said, we deliver in communities, so people are able to stay at home and attend the program. And if I can just find the numbers, sure. We are delivering the program in Nauyat, which is one of the smaller communities in the Central Arctic, in Central Nunavut. We have 15 students in that class. Now, this impacted the elementary school because many of these student support assistants and some of the teachers that weren't yet certified decided to come to take the Nunavut Teacher Education Program. So a very good problem to have, that they're losing people from the school, but for hopefully a future of creating 15 new teachers that can come back into the school once they've completed their studies.
One thing that you mentioned, and it was something that decentralizing isn't always a positive thing, right? But in this case, it very much is, because one thing that we all saw by being in the north is it's a massive area. And one thing that I heard you say at the Northern Lights Conference is the challenge often is for a student to go get training. You have to fly thousands of kilometers away, be away from your family and your friends, etc. But the one thing that I think you're doing a great job of maybe just explain how many communities the college is operating in, and how many communities have access to this program as a result of what you're doing.
So we do operate in all Nunavut communities, so all 25 communities do have learning centers, and we deliver an array of programs at each of those community learning centers. Right now, 15 of those are offering the teacher education program. We have programs such as College Foundations, which is an introduction into college programs, office administration, management studies. We just graduated a cohort of Bachelor of Social Work. All of this done in partnership, or the degree programs done in partnership with Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Very cool. I think that's my time, but 40 seconds. Well, I'll finish with this. We talked about trades training. I think you presented to us there as well. What opportunities are offered to kids that, and I say kids, young students that want to go and get their trades training while still remaining at home in Nunavut? What are the opportunities there? Maybe what are some of the barriers to doing that too?
So right now we are working on expanding the accessibility, but we do have a trade school that offers five trades, which is carpenter, electrician, housing maintainer, oil heat systems technician, and plumber, but students do have to travel to Rankin Inlet at this point in time to attend that.
Right. Very needed trades in those areas for sure.
Absolutely.
Too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. We'll now proceed to Mr. Poloski for 6 minutes.
Hello, welcome to all the guests. And Ms. Osborne, let me start with you. And I'm embarrassed to say I don't know of your high school, and you're centered right here in Thunder Bay. I looked it up online, and do you cover mostly Treaty 3 high schools? Because I know when I think NAN basically looks after, the Dennis Franklin Cromartie School looks after the NAN communities. My understanding is they do distance learning to those communities. But I was looking at your communities, and your communities are further west of there. I'm just trying to figure which communities you bring services to.
So also Treaty 9 and Treaty 5, we serve 15 communities all over Northern Ontario.
So it's not just centered in one geographical region.
No, we cover a wide range of area.
Okay, and so I guess and I know Matawa, I think, does things there too. So there seems to be several jurisdictions, but perhaps you could tell me in those communities you service, is there also the option of physically going to schools, or these are all communities? I would think so, because I think every community there is the option of physically going, and this is an alternative to those. And do you work with the existing schools in those communities?
Definitely work as a partnership with all of the education bodies to support one another, but generally speaking, no high school. Physical high schools are very limited in our community. So some of them do have a new high school. We have a new high school in Big Trout Lake. My home community of Deer Lake, where I lived for 4 years, goes up to grade 9. So Kiiwetinook Internet High School, we offer programming all the way up to grade 12. We have 80 different courses, and it's an alternative. Most students choose to go out for high school, so they'll go move to places like Thunder Bay or Sioux Lookout. They might be living with family. Most of them live with boarding parents. So at KIHS, it's an alternative to that.
Okay, and how many students do you graduate each year, and you do graduate from grade 12?
Correct, yeah. 2 years ago, in 2021, we had 38 graduates. Last year, we had 30. So the numbers do range. They vary.
And they go on to university, or for most of them, grade 12 is the end of their education?
We have seen a handful will go on to post-secondary. What we have seen is students will take a gap year, a couple years off, and then they'll try post-secondary again. And then, frankly,
Okay.
there is a lot of them that are still wondering what to do after graduation.
And your graduation rates in comparison with, like, for example, in Franklin Cromartie School, in other Indigenous high schools, and I guess compared to the regular education system, because I know I've have kids in school here too, and there's fairly sizable Indigenous population in just Lakehead school boards. And how do they compare in terms of graduation rates?
I would suspect they're similar. I don't know the graduation rates of every other school. We're continuing to make progress, and we see the biggest growth within our adult education program. So the average age of our graduate is about 26 years old.
And if I could switch to Rebecca Means, a bunch of us just came back from Nunavut, Northwest Territories. We went to Cambridge Bay. We did visit one of the Arctic College's campuses. Something that I heard about, which was kind of a surprise to me, was the written Inuit language. And apparently that area around Cambridge Bay, they don't use syllabics in their writing. They use the Roman alphabet, but also there are different dialects. And my understanding was, at least talking to a few people, was that an issue was the written language and whether to compile a kind of uniform Inuit language, which would make teaching easier, but different regions have different, not only dialects, but different forms of writing. And the person I talked to suggested in order to facilitate teaching, it would be good to have a universal Inuit language. And what measures are being done to do that? And are you in favor of such a thing?
Thanks for that question. So part of our delivery obviously is in the Inuktitut language, and so that varies across community that we deliver in. The syllabic writing system is used in the most of the eastern communities in Nunavut and many of the central, and then in the western we have Inuinnatun, which is spoken, which is a very dialect from the Inuktitut that I would speak, but still very similar. And I mean, I was able to speak with the elders in Cambridge Bay when I was there just this week as well. I know that we're doing a lot of work at the college to look at how we deliver Inuktitut programming, as we do have language and culture programs. We train interpreter translators at the college as well, and so this is ongoing work, and I think it's a much larger conversation beyond just the college as well when it comes to language. I know there's many that are engaged in those discussions, and there has been discussions for decades about what standardization could look like for use within, whether it's the classroom or within the government. Certainly something that we're always keeping an eye on and very interested in.
Thank you, Mr. Pulaski. Madame Gill pour 6 minutes.
Mrs. Gill for 6 minutes. Thank you. And I'd like to thank all the witnesses here with us today. I see that people don't have their headsets. So thank you. Thank you for being here today. Mrs. Rose mentioned earlier, she said that we have to think of bringing in to communities. I think she was speaking about education, to bring this closer to people rather than sending people hundreds of kilometers away. I'm from a riding that is a point of order.
Madam Chair, I'm hearing two voices on my headset, so I can't hear what's being said through translation.
Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel.
Figure out the technical issue.
This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. English channel. Interpretation test 1, 2, 3. This is the interpretation on the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the interpretation on the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. Sound check, testing 1, 2, 3. English interpretation. Would you like me to continue, Madam Chair? Testing 1, 2, 3. English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. English channel, sound check. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. Sound check. English channel interpretation. Sound check. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. Sound check. Check, check. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Merci. Est-ce que je...
Thank you. Do I start from the beginning, Madam Chair? Yes, please. Thank you. So I am very enthusiastic in order to thank the witnesses for their presence here today. We have some knowledge, but it's always very useful to speak with people who work in the field. Mrs. Rose was saying that education has to be brought within communities rather than sending students hundreds of kilometers away. I think that, and of course I don't want to put words into her mouth, but when we're talking about keeping youth in the school system and we want to have ideal conditions for their success. This is the objective of our study. During the different testimony that we've heard speak about language and about communities and what were the winning strategies so that students could persevere and then graduate and find themselves in the workforce, as Mr. Zimmer was saying. As this goes with the labor force and the community. So each of you, if you want to take turns and speak to the conditions that are important for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Generally speaking, yes, we can have winning conditions for all of the population, but given that our current study has to do with what could be done for the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, I'd like to hear you speak to this on either success stories or things that could be done so that students could succeed and have a high success rate. Mrs. Rose, Mrs. Mearns, and then Mrs. Osborne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. I'd say as far as the success rates, what we find is that especially younger people, when they're coming into our programs, for them to be able to be honest, to have a choice. There are some students that are really ready to go on and have post-secondary experience. In our case, in Whitehorse, where they might pursue a degree or a diploma program. But we also really need to be mindful about programs that need to be available in communities. And Rebecca spoke of the teacher education program being available in so many of the Nunavut communities. What we heard this year, we went around community to community, really trying to understand and hear their priorities in post-secondary and education. And what they said to us, what are the people who attended our sessions said that in some cases, such as business admin, such as if they want to pursue a social work degree, that they seem to prefer to actually go in and take the courses out of Whitehorse. What we heard in some cases, like in the schools, teacher education right now, it was only through the pandemic that we started to make that available by distance. But what we heard is that in some communities, the teacher shortage has become so acute that people who haven't finished their full teaching qualification are are hired as teachers. Some of our students are hired as teachers. If we pull those students out and insist that they come to Whitehorse, they have to pull their families, and then they're pulling children from their school. And so you're actually not only challenging the individuals who make that journey to a larger center, but you're also compromising potentially the success rate of their families and their children. And what we find is worked incredibly well is when we know that we have programs, again, like say, be that the teacher education program. We also offer our First Nations governance or Indigenous governance program by distance. And so a student, no matter where they are in the territory, can pursue that degree and stay and work in their home community. We've seen that that is a successful model, but I'd have to say there's no easy one solution.
Vous avez vu que je vous interrompais.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I have 2 minutes left. I'll give the floor to Mrs. Mearns, if possible, on the same subject. Thank you, Mrs. Rose.
Thank you. I'd have to agree with Sheila as well. There's no simple answer to it, but I think the more investment that we make into education, whether that be at the K-12 level or within the post-secondary education programs that we see, as I discussed today, the more investment, whether it be in infrastructure, whether it be in program delivery, whether it be in student supports, we're going to see an increase in success where we put that investment.
Merci, Madame Gill, and we'll proceed now to Ms. Idlo for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank the witnesses for the presentation that they for their presentations. Now, it is wonderful to hear the successes that you have shared with us, and I have heard what about the success rate. Now, you mentioned Naujat as one of the communities where the teacher education program is being taught. And I know there are many struggles that students face. Anywhere up north, there's housing issues. And my question is, when you accept students as potential into the teacher education program, how do you deal with the struggles that they face in when they move? Thank you. Thank you for your question. And the students from smaller communities don't have access to social assistance. It is harder for them to get social assistance.
Along the way, we work within the programs that we have to ensure that they have that same accessibility that you would see in our regional campuses, but it's not always at par. So part of the work we are doing is trying to increase the number of student supports that we have, and supporting our students, whether it comes down to food insecurity within the home. Obviously, many of our students are reliant upon student funding, student financial assistance while they're attending school. And we all know the cost of living continues to increase and the cost of food continues to increase. So when you're living with a family in a smaller community where those food costs are so high, we're trying to ensure that we have those supports available for them too. Our students come from many walks of life, from many home situations. Ensuring that we have adequate mental health supports in place for them as well is also a challenge within some of the smaller communities. So these are things that we're constantly reviewing, that we're looking at, and trying to figure out how we can make that more accessible. Because we can make the programs accessible, but if they don't have the supports in place, then that's going to impact how they make it through those 4 to 5 years of study.
Thank you for your response. Now, one of the real gray areas is where the Nunavut Arctic College gets their funding from. Where do the students that are attending the teacher education program getting their financial support? Do they have access to those supports? Thank you.
The college, as I stated, is a public agency, an agency of the Government of Nunavut. So we do receive core funding through the Government of Nunavut that is about $40 million, and that goes towards our operations and maintenance across the territory. We also rely on a large amount of third-party funding to be able to provide additional programming. So as I mentioned, the Pathfinder project with funding from the federal government as well as the Government of Nunavut, and also through Makigelta, Inuit training funding has been received, and we rely on all of that coming together to provide or to be able to run our programs. Our students do pay tuition, and we have set tuition amounts, obviously. If they are renting student housing units, they pay rent to the college as well. So those are the main sources of revenue when it comes to that. For our students, when they're attending, many are reliant on financial assistance for Nunavut students, which is a funding body that is out of the Department of Education, and they provide funding for post-secondary training. Some of our students receive funding through adult learning and training, which is funding that's delivered through the Department of Family Services, and those are for other non-designated post-secondary programs. But the funding amounts are set by those bodies, and so they provide the funding directly to the students, not only for their tuition, but also for their monthly living allowances and travel if they have to travel to attend a program.
Thank you, Ms. Sidlow. We do have time for a condensed second round, so we'll be going to Mr. Malilo for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us to be a part of this important discussion. I'm going to start, I think I'll probably focus completely, actually, with you, Ms. Osborne, from Kiiwetinoong Internet High School. I just want to thank you for taking the time to travel down here and be a part of this, and thank you for the work that you do across my riding and across Northern Ontario. It's as you know, incredibly important, and I've appreciated the opportunity to join and be a part of some of your graduation ceremonies as well in the past. So it's great to see some of the successes that you've had. You spoke about many important things. I hope we get a chance to get to them. But broadly, you mentioned the unnecessary barriers that need to be broken down to help improve graduation rates. And one of the great things that I think your organization brings, your school brings, is keeping people in their homes, in their home communities. I think that's incredibly important. We've heard about it countless times, I think, at this table. Whether if we can prevent people from going to Sioux Lookout or Thunder Bay or some of the other larger centers, it's obviously going to be a lot easier for them to learn. To that end, obviously, an internet high school requires internet, and as you know, that's not always something that's reliable across our region. And I want to start with that because there's a recent Auditor General report that came out indicating that as of 2021, just under 43% of First Nation communities across Canada had access to quality, high-speed, and affordable internet. And in Ontario, that drops about 10% to around 33% that don't have access to that internet. So that's I guess a long way of asking if you can shed some light for us onto how that impacts the communities that you work with, and what should be done by the government to help support that.
At an internet high school, the internet is crucial. Now, we're really creative. We all have tools in our toolbox. When the internet goes down, we know how to keep our students productive. The internet is so important for so many reasons. The access to information, the access to quality speakers, the access to role models. Our school's been lucky to partner with many organizations, including Taking It Global and Connected North. You can ask me about them after. Right? As we look forward after high school, we see that more and more post-secondary institutions are offering programs online. We know that COVID has shown us that more and more careers can be done remotely, and there are more and more digital careers. So if we look at graduation rates, if we look at unemployment, if we look at access to mental health services, medical appointments, the internet is a huge investment, but I promise you it's worth it. It's going to tick off so many boxes.
You mentioned, again, in your opening remarks, you laid out a lot of very, I think, exciting things that about your school and things that you're working on, and I want to ask you about as many of them as I can. One that stood out to me is that you mentioned there were 6 different languages offered, and I'm wondering if you could share with us, how that process has sort of come to be, and how the government, again, could hopefully better support that to hopefully replicate it across other jurisdictions as well.
Absolutely. So we offer 3 different languages, 6 different courses. So we have Ojibwe level 1 and level 2. We have Cree level 1 and level 2. And we have Ojibwe level 1 and level 2. So we have a fantastic native language teacher. She has her own courses, obviously, but she does work with all of our teachers. We offer 80 different courses, and she helps us infuse Native Indigenous languages into our lessons, into our daily conversation with students to help reinforce their language, make those connections, and keep those connections.
I appreciate that. I probably have time for one more quick question, if the chair doesn't cut me off. You mentioned as well about how important it is for early learning.
Yeah.
Again, that's something we've heard quite a bit from other witnesses as well. Could you reinforce that and maybe contextualize that a little bit more for us?
I'm a high school teacher, but I have worked at the Deer Lake Elementary School for 4 years. The greater impact is going to happen at the elementary school level. Being honest with you, I do not want my job as a graduation coach to exist in 20 years. I don't want there to be a need for it. We shouldn't be playing catch up. Let's help students at the right age, at those early ages, so that they experience success early. It's not fair for these students to go through their entire schooling career with huge gaps. They internalize these failures. It's so much harder for them. It's not fair. It's not right. I promise that if we invest early in childhood education and if we offer supports to families that are struggling, that is going to make a huge difference in these statistics and in these lives of these students and their families.
Thank you, Mr. Malala. We'll go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I very much appreciate that the witnesses are here today before our committee.
Question I'd like to ask to Ms. Osborne, and I know there was a lot of different prompts you had for questions to ask you, but as a graduation coach, what questions and concerns are you getting most often from students that are looking to pursue post-secondary education?
There's the huge what next factor. So the students at our school have chosen to stay in their home communities to finish high school. There is the option to go out to these bigger cities. So students that have chosen to stay in their communities want to be home. They want to be with their families. And frankly, there's not enough employment opportunities within their communities. So it can be daunting to finish high school with me and then have to look for opportunities outside of their communities for post-secondary education. And then what's next after that? How are they able to work in industries that they feel passionate about when they want to be with their families, they want to be around their culture? That's what I see the most often.
And maybe just to follow up on that, I mean, what opportunities do you see most often for that post-secondary education following graduation?
So in most communities, the schools would be hiring, the health offices, the band, and there is a desperate need for trades, skilled trades in our northern communities, and that is a huge area of growth that we need to support high schools and post-secondary institutions. We shouldn't be having to fly up skilled laborers to fix furnaces or fix roofs. We shouldn't be flying in people to repair the vehicles and other equipment used to maintain the airports. There are people that want to work, that want to stay in their communities. They love working with their hands, but there's definitely a gap. There's a gap there.
Thank you for that, Ms. Osborne. Next, I'd like to ask a couple questions of Ms. Rolls. Really interesting, opening that you gave. And I know a lot of your work, you mentioned a lot of your work in Yukon College or Yukon University is with Indigenous peoples. And I was hoping you could explain to this committee how you see the process of decolonizing education and how might this be able to apply in other educational institutions across Canada?
So, certainly the process of decolonizing education comes from so many different levels. And one thing we're really, really proud of is even comes to our legislation. So our legislation really requires us to be working. I guess there's a legal requirement for us to be working with Yukon First Nations and ensuring that the students have successful outcomes. Part of our funding and the determination of Yukon government in our success as a post-secondary will be dependent on the feedback and the success rates of First Nation students or Indigenous students in Yukon, but specifically Yukon First Nation students. I'd say we have, I think we've introduced a whole variety of programs that have come through by request of Yukon First Nations. And so we have something called a President's Committee on First Nations Initiatives. And that committee has representation from each of the 14 First Nations in the territory, as well as some of the neighboring communities as well, some from the Gwich'in Council over in the Mackenzie Delta area, as well as from Lower Post over in BC and Atlan, BC. And so we're really trying to ensure that we hear the priorities and the interests of the First Nations. And through that, we have responded as far as introducing different types of student support, such as we've introduced First Nations navigators to be able to provide that holistic support to students within the university. But we've also introduced programs that are truly co-created. And I'd say the environmental monitoring was one example where the mining companies were wanting us to have an environmental monitoring program that's a fiduciary requirement of theirs. But First Nations said, we really want our interests to be paramount and for any graduates coming out of those programs to really understand what an environmental monitor should be doing from our perspective. And we found that just such an amazing model in that a number of the graduates from that program have really gone on to work in the lands departments of the First Nation governments. And, in some cases, are directors of lands in the governments. I think in the last question period, I referenced the Indigenous governance program, and that's another one that has been co-created. And it was really the question of having the program came from First Nations as they were establishing their new governments. They really understood the important role of policy, the importance of an oversight and broad governance is to the sustainability and the future of those governments. And so with that, we created a degree where we finally be honest about challenges.
Ms.
It's
Rawls, I'm so
really
sorry. I have to cut you off for time.
Oh.
Perhaps you can continue in the next response. Thank you very much. Madame Guillaume, pour 2 minutes et demi.
2.5 minutes, Mrs. Gill. Microphone, please.
We'll have to suspend briefly just to figure out the technical difficulty. Just 1 minute. Est-ce que c'est sur soldé?
Are you on mute? Could you possibly be on mute?
We'll go to Madame Idlo for 2 minutes and 2.5 minutes, and then we'll come back to Madame Gill.
I have two questions for you, Becky. First question is the funding that you mentioned, is it adequate? Especially, is it adequate funding for Nunavut Arctic College? And is it adequate for the teacher education program? And that is my first question. And if you could also reiterate or speak a little more about the cultural institute, learning institute that you have there. And yes, thank you.
We have enough funds to operate within what we're doing, but there is more need when it comes to our student supports, when it comes to infrastructure funding. That's really where we're lacking at the moment, and whether that be for physical buildings, infrastructure, housing, things like that, but as well as internet and accessibility. We are always looking to see how we increase, whether it be person years within the college or increasing funding for programmings, hence why a lot of third-party funding is received right now. That's been, we've identified areas where we need additional funding to fund those programs, and that work's ongoing. And there's still ongoing need to increase the funding that we have for student supports. And I think part of what we recognize too is that we're providing mental health supports, we're providing food supports, things like that. These are all things that are impacted by life at home. So if you're in overcrowded housing, if you're food insecure, if you have other issues going on within the home, that's impacting your life at school. And so that's where we need more of that within the college, within our schools, within our communities overall. The second piece you wanted me to speak to was our cultural school. It's named Picos de la Rivique. It's located in Clyde River. There is a question about decolonization within education, and I think this is really a wonderful example of that and a really wonderful place to visit if you're ever looking to go somewhere else to learn more about how Inuit teach. Picos de la Rivique is run fully in Inuktitut. It's run through cultural programming. The students do research, they spend time out on the land, they hunt, they build things, they learn to sew, they learn to build tools, and they learn to utilize those tools on the land. So it is a genuinely Inuit-built, Inuit way of knowing, way of being, and way of teaching that is utilized at that school. And it's an absolutely incredible place. And it's an amazing place to go and see the growth that can happen within our students when they're allowed to live within their language, within their culture, and to be able to learn from elders and knowledge keepers around them.
Thank you, Ms. Idlo. And perhaps if Ms. Gill is okay? Est-ce que Madame Gill, ça marche maintenant?
Ms. Gill, is it working now? Madam Chair, can you hear me? Yes. 2.5 minutes? Great. Mrs. Osborne, earlier, I know it went quite quickly. I was not able to ask you the same question I asked of Mrs. Rolls and Mrs. Mears. We spoke about conditions to improve the graduation rate and the success rate of students. So factors that might be more specific to Indigenous communities. Could you tell us what is important for you in order to have a good success rate?
So I look at this question in two ways. If we look at the short term, we need to create conditions where students are coming to school more regularly, so attendance issues. I'm not sure if your question is about the physical conditions. Most of our schools are tiny portables. There's definitely some need for repair and upkeep. It's not uncommon for our schools to be without running water, to be without heat. There's many school closures that affect our attendance issues in our communities. I also want to talk about the long-term conditions needed to improve graduation rates. And again, that goes to equipping students early on with the academic skills that they need. And that needs to happen by working with the local education authorities at the elementary school level. So having Indigenous teachers in their schools is so important. I was in Deer Lake First Nation for 4 years. And the turnover of non-local teachers is an issue. It's hard to build on progress when you have people that are leaving. We need to make sure that we're investing in those early childhood education programs to see the success that we want to later on.
Vous avez 30 secondes, Madame Gill.
30 seconds, Mrs. Gill. Oh, I don't have enough time to go far enough. Thank you, Mrs. Chair.
Merci beaucoup. This is going to bring our first round of questions to a close, our first panel. So thank you so much, Ms. Nikki Osborne, Rebecca Mearns, and Shayla Rouse for your testimony this afternoon. Thank you for giving us your time, and I know it will greatly contribute to our study, so thank you so much. We'll briefly suspend just as we set up for our next set of witnesses. Thank you. want to note that there will not be Inuktitut interpretation for this round, only Plains Cree, as we don't have the technology currently to support 2 third languages at this time. But it's certainly a wonderful treat that we'll be able to have that interpretation this afternoon. Appearing before us, we have Kevin Lewis, Assistant Professor of the University of Saskatchewan and the Gayanyazik Culture Camps. From Cape Breton University, we have Marie Batiste, Special Advisor to the Vice President Academic, Provost on Decolonizing the Academy. And from the University du Québec à Montréal, we have Marco Bacon, Director of Office of Inclusion and Student Success. Each of you will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and we'll begin with Mr. Lewis. Thank you.
Nanas Kumunanotstapwe. I want to greet you all. I want to talk the Creator first. One and foremost, that I have to thank the Creator for giving us this day. And the reason why I am here today is to talk about the graduation rates of our First Nation students, our youth, and the ones that are going to universities and colleges. What I really wanted to talk about, and I really want to thank the Standing Committee for inviting me again. I would like to give thanks to the Standing Committee for allowing me to speak in my own language. If we are to talk about our own children, language it should be the forefront in terms of teaching. When we teach our children, in my own reserve is Ministiquin. We always take our students, our elders, and our parents that are involved in our Cree immersion school programming. It is up to the elders that are wanting us to take all our kids to the land, to know where they come from, and to try and retain the language, bring back the language in my own reserve in Ministiquin. The first time in 1976 and the early 1980s, when we first opened our school, a brand new school, our school went up to grade 9 and then up to grade 12. And then what we did with our students when they came there is English was taught in that school. There was no Cree language wasn't even taught. And then our elders came, and they came to assess. And this is where our elders were crying that there was no Cree language. At one time, when we were teaching kids in our school the Cree language, a lot of the parents that came to assess our school programming, they were able to read and write in our own language. And we piloted this program from Onion Lake Cree Immersion School. And how is it that these kids are able to read and write and do the numbers in our Cree language? I really wanted to talk about where we went for our Cree language teaching training. We went to Alberta University. This is where we all went to teach how to teach Cree. And in that school, they were telling us it is better to teach these kids in our Cree language. These kids are most likely to be very, very successful in terms of finishing high school. They have to be taught in Cree and in English. And when we first started in nursery, kindergarten, and up to grade 2, and when we get to grade 3, we saw the progress, how these kids are learning their English and language at the same time, and they were very, very successful. They were able to retain their language. We really need to keep our language alive in our own schools and in our community and where we come from in Ministiquin. We are very fortunate in our own reserve where we still have a lot of elders that are urging us to teach and to retain our language right in the classroom. And we are starting to see the language loss in our schools today. When the epidemic came, there were a lot of social problems that came, a lot of social problems, family violence. The reserve was very, very, there were a lot of social problems. And with that, poverty comes from family violence. But then elders are urging us just to keep teaching our languages. We are also wanting to teach our own children. They will be very successful. And in terms of kinship, we need to bring back the language. We need to bring back the language. And here we talk about relationships. We talk about kinship. This is our very strong relationships with the land.
Allô, greetings, bonjour. I'm honored today to be invited to speak to you on unceded Algonquin territories. I'm here to recommend to your committee the continuing resourcing of Indigenous education to learning from Indigenous perspectives of success and a trans-systemic alignment and commitment to Indigenous peoples' knowledges as the foundation of First Nations learning and success. I am a Mi'kmaq educator from Boudladeck First Nation, an author, and a professor emeritus at the University of Saskatchewan, my colleague, Kevin, where I've completed 28 years in teacher education, having taught courses and supervised graduates in First Nation, Métis, and Inuit education, anti-racist education, and decolonizing education. I'm currently working part-time as a special advisor to Cape Breton University on decolonizing the academy, now in my home area of Unama'ki. For a period of my career at the University of Saskatchewan, starting in 2005, I was the co-director of one of the 5 nationally funded projects of the Canadian Council on Learning, called then the Aboriginal Learning Knowledge Centre, that served learning for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities. One of the projects was to review graduation rates across the country and identify ways to improve them. From literature reviews, we reviewed graduation rates of Indigenous students compared with other non-Indigenous Canadians and found often that these metrics were being interpreted through a deficit lens of Indigenous students. In other words, what Indigenous students lacked compared to others and not what they had. Indeed, those rates illustrated more clearly the failure of assimilation policies of residential and public schooling and their ongoing intergenerational damage to Indigenous families and communities. This realization led us to generate community workshops, collaborations with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit leadership and communities to identify what success meant to these communities and how learning supported it. They defined success in multi-layered processes leading to 3 First Nation, Métis, and Inuit holistic learning models. Learning was described as holistic, lifelong, experiential, communally activated, grounded in language and cultures of the communities, from their land, involving their spiritual relational worldviews and growing roles and responsibilities in those places with each other and their ecology. It also included the braiding of diverse knowledge systems of diverse Indigenous peoples and conventional Western education. These themes have largely been the foundations in First Nations control of their education, as you've been hearing. And within them, graduation rates have been improving. Yet First Nations schooling, to generate better outcomes, must have foundations transferred and aligned with provincial schools and post-secondary education to create what I call a better trans-systemic fit. Without that, Indigenous students are limited in the transfer of their learning in their community schools to public and post-secondary education. Decolonization of public and post-secondary education is unpacking the colonial structures, content, outcomes, and rebuilding new structures and impacting disciplinary knowledge traditions, but these are still a struggle unfolding. Today, the mandate for reconciliation from TRC calls to action, indigenization, decolonization requires new trans-systemic learning and new opportunities, different theory and practices, some not yet available in current post-secondary teacher education. A return to a type of resourcing and support for Indigenous knowledges that the former Aboriginal Learning Knowledge Centre offered can mobilize the needed foundation for a pan-Canadian architecture supportive of the needed infrastructure across Canada. The UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, now enacted in Canada, affirms inherent Indigenous rights in Canada, but only as potential unrealized learning opportunities in and through education, public, federal, and post-secondary. Learning for success is a focus on building for the future, on sustainability, on collective identities, and on Indigenous rights, a reconciliation that Canada and its institutions must continue to address. For Indigenous parents and elders, passing on what we know is an act of love, not just to our children, but to the seventh generation. This can only be achieved when we re-examine the educational purposes for learning and the requirements for that education and what it purports to achieve with students, Indigenous students' graduation. It is about the continuous scrutiny and alignment of Indigenous knowledge content with learning in schools and systems and the honoring of Indigenous contributions to the cognitive advancement, self-determination, and well-being of our people. It needs to continue to affirm and honor excellence in experimentation, exploration, and diffusion of Indigenous knowledges, languages, and traditions that contribute to the uniqueness of the institutions and knowledges of Canada, while also ensuring that graduation contributes to self-determining, flourishing communities by their successes in multiple knowledge systems. Walaling, Nakurik, thank you. Merci.
Voilà, Madame Baptiste. Mr. Bacon, vous avez la parole pour 5 minutes.
You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Tawin mo leno deni etian menjis kahagat ekshno pabegz bo gadat no en ende no jinil masteriats innu pe wa mi not ek on est oui wa wid man gevin ne hetchel la man de gatchel madnanot. Bonjour à tous.
Hello everyone. I'm very pleased to be with you today. I'm from the Pewagminut Nation. To give you a bit of history, I think it will be necessary with regards to what I would like to say to you today. Myself, I was a student in my community before it was taken in hand. So it was, of course, religious congregations that taught school to us. And for a young student starting out in school, it's really important. It's something that has a huge impact. It's important to continue with one's studies. And in my case, something really was really marked me strongly, perhaps not in a good way. Really, it was with physical marks. The religious people knew how to use this. And then this was taken in hand But this happened suddenly, and things did not improve suddenly. There was a long process to take this so that the community could take the education into its own hands. I would say that during this period, it was not a very happy period of time to go to school. It was never a joyful experience. But I persisted and I continued. At some point in time, I went to university. I studied arts education, and afterwards I did a master's in arts. And this allowed me to go back into my community to teach. I was extremely privileged because the first job that I had in Masteriats, and I taught there for 15 years, it was preschool teacher from kindergarten to grade 4, and then I was in kindergarten for 5-year-olds, and there was a program with Indigenous languages to try to rekindle the Innu language within my community. And afterwards, I was able to teach arts, and I taught at primary school and also at high school. And then I taught at the CEGEP level. And during a part of this time, and afterwards, I was in Chicoutimi in the Saguenay region at Université du Québec at Chicoutimi, and I was director of the First Nations Center there. I was director at the First Nations Center for 10 years, and the mandate in Nakanti was to develop programs, was to give access also to university training to communities, and to work in cooperation with communities and create research projects to provide services to Indigenous students, and finally, to raise awareness among the university community as to First Nations issues, and also First Nations culture, obviously. This entire period was a 10-year period, and I think, well, when I said that we experienced, because we were a team, and there were many things in relationship with university training, and I will come back on this, and I'm going to now jump, well, after those 10 years at Université du Québec and Chicoutimi, then I applied for the director of the Inclusion and Student Success office at UQAM. The Inclusion office, it's not only, we serve all populations, all students. Might be a student with a physical disability, might be LGBTQ, 2A+ students, it might be international students. Also, I'm sorry, Mr. Bacon, could you end? And maybe you could add comments during the question period. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much.
Round of questions. Mr. Vidal, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank all our witnesses today for being here and your contribution to our important study. And just a quick shout out, Dr. Lewis, I believe your mom is here translating for us again today, so that's really cool. She was here during the languages study that we did a while back, so that's quite a cool opportunity. I just want to recognize that. We've heard from a number of witnesses over the last few weeks about the importance of language, culture, land-based learning in the context of successful, I don't want to just focus on just graduation rates, but successful outcomes for students. And Dr. Lewis, you talked about children being most successful or most likely successful if taught in both Cree and English at a young age. Can you just help us make the link between what you mean by being the most successful and those outcomes that are a result of being able to do that, and in your experience, you know, catching them at that young age, and how that leads to better outcomes?
Ja, ngani hiyo ani ko no chiksi se gami asin ai ko
Three. This is why I have to do it.
Slamato.
Kita matsita, Kevin. What I wanted to talk about is myself, about my own journey towards education. I shouldn't really be bragging about myself, about my own education, but when it comes to, I went to school on the reserve. I grew up going to school there. And then I also went to the nearby town school, Ernie Studer School, and I also went to university at the UFS. And the other school that I went to was a residential school. And all those three institutions that I went, not once did I ever see a First Nations person to work there, any females to work there or even to speak the Cree language, or even to talk about family relationships, family kinship, good family raising. And even when I went to university, same thing. Even though it was called the Indian Teacher Education Program, I never saw any languages being taught there, or Indian ways of knowing, or Indian knowledge. If you want to see how you want to teach these children in terms of learning languages, you have to both include Cree, Nakota, Dene, and even the Blackfoot. If we can combine all those languages together at the university, then you would be able to see the success rate. Here, you won't be able to see any high incarceration rates. You won't even see any poverty if all the First Nations people can work together in terms of education. And then even in the homes, we would be able to outcome the poverty and even the family violence. We would like to see, and my dream is to see these women, our matriarchal lineages, to teach in those schools and to teach in those institutions so we could have role models. One and foremost is we have to be able to have role models teach in those schools and in those institutions. And in terms of policy making, we have to include First Nations people to have some say, to have some foot in there. And here, we would be able to, we would be able to put role models in the House of Commons, in the Standing Committee, or even to join in boards, school boards. And then those people, those First Nations people would be able to speak on behalf of their First Nations people. And my dream and my goal is to be able to see First Nations languages taught in the schools and the universities.
And I think I'm making the connection here, but I'm just going to give you. I don't have a lot of time left, but just a quick opportunity. I know you were sitting in the back when Miss Osborne was talking, the grad coach from Northern Ontario, and she made a comment about we must give young people a reason to graduate. We have to create the opportunity for them to have a reason to want to graduate. And I think there's a connection to both what she's saying and what you're saying. And I just want to give you the opportunity to just tie those two together quickly in the few seconds I have left.
What I wanted to say is that there is lack in terms of electricians. We lack carpenters. We lack people, the accountants, and we also lack people in terms of policy making. We lack all those, the ones that I named. But if they were to attend the university or any colleges to be taught all these different trades, then we would be able to support ourselves. Then we would be able to be self-sufficient. And this is where we want our children to be taught, so we could have role models, and they would be able to grow up to follow these role models on the reserve. And we are able to see those role models on our reserves, are in our schools, and we need those people.
For 6 minutes.
Well, thank you. And to begin, I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm gathered with everyone here today on the unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territories. I come from the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, and particularly the Kwantlen, Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Matskami nations in British Columbia. For me, it's really important to acknowledge that this is only my second meeting. I was only put on this committee last week for my first meeting. And so it's a real pleasure to be here. I wanted to thank my Conservative colleagues for the very warm welcome, and it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to working with everybody, as well as the NDP and Bloc members. I'm still getting up to speed on what this study is about. It's, I think, very deep content, and I'd like to thank each of our speakers today for your thoughts that you've given us so far. And I have to say, Ms. Batiste, that your son sits in front of me, and I told him if he was here today, I was going to ask you for some personal stories, but I won't put you on the story. We'll focus your expertise in other areas. Yes, but it's a real pleasure to have you here and actually to work with your son here in the House of Commons. I have had a chance to move around this amazing country and live in the traditional territories of many First Nations, from southern and northern Ontario through all three prairie provinces, various regions of British Columbia, the Yukon and Northwest Territories. And one of the things that I've seen related to education, I think, Ms. Batiste, your comments about decolonizing, unpacking colonial structures really resonated with me. I hear from our Kwantlen community members who, they say they want their kids to have a good education, but when the fish start running, they need to be out on the land. And there's always this conflict between school schedules and traditional lifestyles. And we've heard from all of you about the importance of language and developing that language retention as part of identity and success. And so I'd like to give you a moment to talk a bit more about that unpacking of colonial structures. What does that look like? I'm sure that there's flexibility in how we build schedules, curricula that will allow families and communities to get out on the land at the appropriate times without sacrificing or missing school time. It's about having language accessible from preschool right through the education system. But what else does that look like as far as unpacking those colonial structures to lead us to greater outcomes?
Thank you. And no, somebody's taking care of that. Okay. Thank you for the question. I think that what I would like to see and what is present and what is available now are not in sync. That's why I keep saying we need to have a better fit between what we're aspiring for is self-determining, flourishing communities that have and want and are retaining all of the foundations of their knowledge through their languages, through the kinds of learning processes that I talk about as holistic, lifelong, experiential, and community activated, and working through language and culture, and working with the spiritual worldviews and so on. But what they are getting right now is a education in our communities, and you've heard already the various communities that are doing wonderful things in their work that they're doing in their community schools and so on. But what's happening is that as these children move on to university or into public schools, that those institutions are creating the dissonance, that they don't then have haven't decolonized those institutions, haven't brought languages in, have dropped Indigenous content into a few content areas, but it's all structured in a modern four-wall school. And so that dissonance creates the ongoing dissonance that students have of trying to develop, new skills in another language system, and struggling with that in English, and trying to struggle with the kinds of expectations that those create. What I'm trying to assert is that we need to find a way to bring these structures and ways of learning together. That in the public school systems and also in universities, there's this notion of indigenization and reconciliation, and those kinds of things need to have a tie-in with what is in our First Nation community schools and how that fits. I think land-based learning is one of the important elements that is what we find in all of these, and they do fit well with learning, and we've got a university master's program in land-based learning at the University of Saskatchewan, but that's only in pockets of places. So, Nunavut and University of Saskatchewan, but we can't seem to get all of them on board to do these kinds of things to create this necessary fit, which is why I think we need to have some kind of other structure that will help us to build those promising practices, build new theory around Indigenous knowledge traditions, and braiding them with contemporary modern systems.
Thank you.
About 20 seconds.
Okay, I was going to say I'm new at this committee, and I forgot to start my clock, so I had no idea where I was at. I would have loved to have heard from our other Mr. Lewis and Monsieur Bacon on the same topic, but I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Aldeg. And Madame Gill, vous avez la parole pour 6 minutes.
Madam Gill, 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to thank our witnesses for coming here today. Of course, we've been talking about education on the territory earlier, and I would like to ask a question of Mr. Bacon. In his testimony, he talked about his personal experience as an individual. He went through the education system and he succeeded. And on the other hand, all of his professional experience, it's a rich professional experience. He's taught actually from kindergarten to university in his own community and other communities. So I would like to hear him speak on the needs, regardless of the subject, but everything that we need to make sure that education will be accessible and available and will respond to the needs of students in communities so that they're able to want to study and to succeed. I think that success is relative, of course, for each individual. So let's take this in the term of personal growth and development. Mr. Bacon.
Je parle beaucoup.
You have 4.5 minutes left. So where I was trying to get to earlier, the fact that I work from kindergarten to university, is that there's a fundamental thing for student success, Indigenous student success, and that is to know their profile. You need to know the profile of a student. This is extremely important because all the difficulties that might have accumulated during their journey, given that we have very few specialists in our communities, we have a lack of support staff for students. And this follows them up to university. So academic success sometimes depends a lot on psychosocial support, on academic support. Sometimes these students arrive in an urban setting as students and they're disconnected from their community. They're a little bit lost. They are in a culturally different place. And so centers and universities have created an institution. They try to support these students on a psychosocial level, on an academic level, but where there is a limit to this is that we can intervene with regards within the university, but oftentimes the issues arise outside of the university. So this is outside of our jurisdiction because we, of course, can't deploy all our services outside of the university. So it's important for us to create partnerships with the institutions and the setting so that students can have support outside of a university, for example, in an urban setting. And this, well, oftentimes, perseverance or success, it can be determined by an incident that happened in the home, perhaps a family violence or difficulty in getting enough food. And so I could go through an entire list, but I think that what we have to deal with and where we have to put our efforts is to create bridges with the setting. And I could tell you, we have to take into account the student's profile. And I don't know if it's the same thing in other provinces outside of Quebec, but students that come to university, they have two profiles. They have a regular profile, they go to CEGEP, then they go to university, but then there's an adult student. They didn't go through CEGEP. They ended up high school, and then they end up in university at some point, and sometimes there are gaps. There are gaps in their learning in order to succeed at university, and this is why it's important to support these students with specialists that can help them in all kinds of different ways, methodology, how to use a computer technology, so with regards to learning, but also if they're feeling isolated, in this urban setting, to have people that will intervene and accompany them so that they can persevere during their learning process. All of these elements are extremely important so that they will have the support. And also we have a limit. We have a limit within the university that we cannot exceed, and we would have to think about how we can create partnerships, perhaps with organizations that already exist, perhaps friendship centers. Normally, there are friendship centers in urban settings. We could perhaps have a partnership where they could be helped by a friendship center, but then at the university, it could be our staff that work with the First Nations. So we need to think about this further. I think that it's extremely important for student academic success, Indigenous student success. Thank you, Mrs. Gill and Mr. Bacon. Madam Utlaut.
Just very quickly, I wanted to welcome you using my language. Normally, I speak Inuktitut with an interpreter. You get the pleasure of listening to me in English today because of the wonderful work that Mr. Kevin Lewis is doing. I just have one question, and I'm going to leave it to the chair to time them, because I would love for each of them to answer my one question. And it's based on what Kevin said in response to a conservative question. I think that as Indigenous peoples, we're all very quick to identify what our gaps are. And I think what we need to learn to do also is to identify what the gaps are federally and provincially. So I wonder if each of you can answer what you see the gaps are for Indigenous students' success federally and provincially. So for example, if you're saying that there aren't enough Indigenous people that are becoming accountants or those other professions, what are the federal and provincial governments not doing enough to get Indigenous peoples to be working as bureaucrats so that we could see legislation and policies that are more in line with the Indigenous worldview?
Be about a minute and a half each.
Ninan, even in our I would like to talk about our reserve when in terms of the epidemic we had, COVID epidemic. Although we were given the technology to use for each household, and we couldn't even use online school because we didn't have cell service. And the other one, when we talk about the curriculum, we need to use those. We lack a lot of curriculum development. We lack Cree language teachers, Dene teachers, Lakota teachers, and they have no resources. We really need to have those, and this is our heart's desire that we really need to start having them, and we really need to start working and developing our own curriculum. It is our dream that we need to have translators and we need to have interpreters in our own communities. And how do we talk with these elders? And in terms of written language, in terms of doing syllabics, and the doing the standard Roman orthography writing, we need to bring that with the elders. I have lots to say, but all I can say is there is a lot of lack in our own communities.
Thank you. One of the things in Nova Scotia that we have now is a legislation that it recognizes Mi'kmaq language, and that's a great thing. That's more recent. But what we don't have is, and as we have this language, some of it is going to supporting the Indigenous languages in our own communities, in Mi'kmaq and Amandagoy and beyond. But one of the things that they've done is they have translated some of the curriculum outcomes and so on into Mi'kmaq. But the gap problem is that it's all around a Eurocentric curriculum. And so we can put all kinds of Mi'kmaq language onto a Eurocentric curriculum, but that doesn't help us to develop our Indigenous knowledges, our Indigenous knowledge traditions, or keep our knowledge traditions alive and well for the 7th generation. What we're doing right now is layers of assimilation that keeps on supporting one knowledge system, and it does so by just adding into it a few content areas that are Mi'kmaq, but it doesn't really give the full nature and foundation of what Indigenous knowledge is and what we're trying to retain for our children for the future. And so I think that all of those things that the province does, also the federal government does not provide the second layers of what we once did with the Aboriginal Learning Knowledge Center was create another layer of an architecture of learning that extended beyond that Eurocentric curriculum. And I think that at this present time, the governments, all of them working in education and learning, need to build their foundations on the reconciliation of Indigenous knowledge traditions in all the systems and not just have it for, it is not just for us, it's for all of Canadians, and all of them could benefit from that in non-appropriated and also in ethical ways.
Mr. Bacon, aussi.
Oui, ben,
I would like to say that if people are going to school and they obtain a degree, it's to create a career for themselves and to work. What happens oftentimes, well, some students will study, they have an objective. Sometimes, some of them are already working and they obtain a certificate in order to upgrade their situation. Sometimes, if you go in the law faculty, for example, you'll see 10 Indigenous lawyers. There are many more women studying law than men. So you have 10. They're not hired at the same time within the community, these 10 women studying law, so one or two might be hired. The others, well, they have no place to go. One of the solutions that governments, either provincial or federal, could bring forth are programs, either employability programs for lawyers, so that they not lose all that they've acquired within organizations in an urban setting, that there be a program for hiring. Organizations don't always have the funds to hire, but if we have excellent programs to hire graduates while awaiting to be able to integrate within their community, they can at least work in their field for organizations, whether Indigenous or non-Indigenous, to not lose their skills. I think that this would be a good solution on behalf of the two levels of government to have access to employment programs for graduates. And it could be some sort of co-op program, but that's a different story.
Thank you so much to Dr. Marie Batiste as well, Dr. Kevin Lewis. Thank you so much for your testimony this afternoon. We know it's going to contribute greatly to our study. That leaves that's the end of our second panel. Is there movement to adjourn?
First of all, I'd like to propose a motion, if I have a quick second here, Chair, before we adjourn, not to really mess things up. Well, mine was going to be real simple. It's Eric Millilow's birthday, and given that John Aldag is newest to the committee, I'd like to propose a unanimous consent motion that John lead singing of happy birthday to Eric.
No, I'm not sure if Eric wants.
Do we have a
less than
seconder
I
for that
do,
motion?
We're ready to filibuster if needed. No, that's all. That's no problem.
Happy birthday, Eric. Birthday, Eric.
Madame Gill, aussi. Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I did not want to take time away from the witnesses. I would like to know if we can look at committee business soon, perhaps 10 minutes, so that we can discuss motions that are under notice of motion.
Madame Gill, vous pouvez poser votre...
Madam Gill, you can go ahead. I'd like to do it during the next meeting. I can wait till the next meeting. I didn't want to take any time away from the witnesses. I wanted to do it outside of the time. I don't know if I need to ask for unanimous consent so that we can take some time outside of the regular meeting. Yes? Next time we can do this. Yes? Thank you so much.
Yeah, you just